Hi, my name is Annie, and welcome to the Walking Word, where we go through the Holy Bible in a year as part of discipling. We are currently in the book of Judges, chapter 8, and we finally see the death of Gideon. Remember, Judges is a transitional book on leadership amongst the Israelites, so they're moving out from Joshua and Moses, they're moving towards kings, but in the middle, this middle era, they're led by judges. Judges were not only military leaders, but they also judged the community. That was their role. So in chapter 8 of Judges, but the Ephraimites, now these are the Ephraimites who followed Midian all the way to the Jordan, right? Beyond the Jordan. But the Ephraimites said to him, "What have you done to us, not calling us when you went to fight Midian?" And they quarreled bitterly with him. "What have I accomplished now in comparison with you?" He answered them, "Is not the gleaning of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? Into your power God delivered the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. What have I been able to do in comparison with you?" When he said this, their anger against him subsided. So Ephraim is a bit pissed, like, "Oh, wait a minute, you went to the camp, to the valley, and fought them without us. You only went with 300 men. Now you need our help." And Gideon is like, "Chill out, guys. You already killed their kings. You've already conquered them. You've done more than I could ever do. So what's the beef here? Don't you even have a better vantage point based on where you live to conquer all these people? So what a small guy from Abiezer, got to do with this, you know?" And I guess Gideon knew how to pamper them, and they chilled out after that. Verse 4, when Gideon reached the Jordan and crossed it with his 300 men, they were exhausted and famished. Okay. So he said to the men of Succoth. Succoth is where? Succoth, remember, means booths. It's where Jacob, their ancestor, had built booths when he was leaving. He was coming back to his father's land, and it's around Succoth there, somewhere around there, that he met Esau for the first time after they had separated for a while. Okay. When Gideon reached the Jordan and crossed it with his 300 men, they were exhausted and famished. So he said to the men at Succoth, "Will you give my followers some loaves of bread? They are exhausted, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmana, kings of Midian." But the princess of Succoth replied, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmana already in your possessions, that we should give food to your army?" Gideon said, "Very well. When the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmana into my power, I will grind your flesh. Ooh, I will grind your flesh in with the thorns and the briars of the desert." He went up from there to Penuel and made the same request of them. But the men of Penuel answered him as had the men of Succoth. So to the men of Penuel too he said, "When I return in triumph, I will demolish this tower." Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their force of about 15,000 men. These were all who were left of the whole Kedemite army, 120,000 swordsmen having fallen. Gideon went up the route of the nomads east of Nobah and Jogbeha and attacked the camp when it felt secure. Zebah and Zalmunna fell. He pursued them and took the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, captive, throwing the entire army into panic. So once their kings, their princes were captured, now the army is in panic, yeah? Then Gideon, son of Joash, as he surely promised, returned from battle by the pass of Heres. He captured the young man of Succoth, who, upon being questioned, listed for him the 77 princes and elders of Succoth. So he went to the men of Succoth and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, with whom you taunted me. You refused to give me bread. You refused to take care of me and my men because we were hungry. We were coming from war. Yeah, and you taunted us." So back then, if you stood in a city that you are not having a beef with, and you ask for help, it was a form of showing allegiance or alliance, or showing that, you're in good standing with them. But they refused. They were just like, they all kept on refusing to help. So now what happened? What truly happened? So, of course, Gideon came back with the two princes he had, the two kings he had already conquered. Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your possession that you now? This is Gideon reminding them how they taunted him when him and his men needed just some bread because they were famished, and what they told him. Here are Zebah and Zalmunna with whom you taunted me. Verse 15. Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your possession that we should give you food for your weary followers? He took the elders of the city, and the thorns and the briars of the desert, and ground these men of Succoth into them. He also demolished the tower of Penuel and slew the men of the city. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, Where now are the men you killed at Tabor? They all resembled you, they replied. They appeared to be princes. They were my brothers, my mother's sons, he said. As the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I should not kill you. Then he said to his firstborn, Jether, go kill them. Since Jether was still a boy, he was afraid and did not draw his sword. Zebah and Zalmunna said, Come, kill us yourself, for man's strength is like the man. So Gideon stepped forward and killed Zebah and Zalmunna. He also took the crescents that were on the necks of their camels. Oh man, why did you take the crescents? These are half moons. Those are probably signs of pagan worship. Why did you take it? But look at just the confidence of Gideon. He went to war carrying his young son. The Israelites then said to to Gideon, Rule over us, you, your son, and your son's son, for you rescued us from the power of the Midian. But Gideon answered them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord must rule over you. Gideon went on to say, I should like to make a request of you. Will each of you give me a ring from his booty? For being Ishmaelites, the enemy had gold rings. Aha. Ishmaelites. You remember Ishmaelites basically from the lineage of Ishmael, and many of Ishmaelite tribes were nomadic in nature. To this day, most of the Muslim Middle Eastern areas, many of them are nomadic, right? The Middle East is, yeah, and many of them are the descendants of Ishmael. Then remember also, these rings were heavily associated with pagan worship, or they were consecrated to some form of deity, which was not Yahweh. But let's continue. We will gladly give them, they replied, and spread out a cloak into which everyone threw a ring from his booty. The gold rings that he requested weighed 1,700 gold shekels. In addition to the crescents and the pendants, the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and the trappings that were on the necks of the camels, Gideon made an ephod out of the gold and placed it in his city, Ophrah. However, all Israel paid idolatrous homage to it there and caused the ruin of Gideon and his family. So you may have built something with the idea that as a remembrance to what God has done for you and your tribe and everything, and helping you conquer. But soon when that is revered more, that platform, that gold effort, that job, that spouse, when people, or even your giftings, when it is placed higher than the gift giver, the person who actually gave you that, then it becomes a snare for you and your family because it's idolatrous. Thus was Midian brought into subjection by the Israelites. No longer did they hold their heads high, and the land had rest for 40 years during the lifetime of Gideon. Okay, you see, slavery when in disobedience, rest for 40 years when you're in obedience with God. Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, son of Joash, went back home to stay. Now Gideon had 70 sons. Wow, 70 sons. His direct descendants, for he had many wives. His concubine, who lived in Shechem, also bore him a son, whom he named Abimelech. At a good old age, Gideon, son of Joash, whom we call Jerubbaal, died and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezerites. But after Gideon was dead, the Israelites again abandoned themselves to the Baal, making Baal of Berith. Yeah, remember we said the Baal means Lord, and Berith in this instant means covenant. So the Lord of the covenant, Baal of Berith, their god, small g. So they built an altar for this fake god, and forgetting the Lord their God, Yahweh, who had delivered them from the power of their enemies all around them. Nor were they grateful to the family of Gideon, Jerubbaal, for all the good he had done for Israel. So they lost all respect for Gideon towards his death. They lost respect for God. We move to Judges chapter 9 in the next one.